Hi, glad to see you on my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, it's important to me. Have a good view. The first post-war years were a kind of a time of no return for the squadron. Simultaneously with the Yaks, it flew for almost a year on NCTA 900 fighters, which were no more and no less than a copy of the German FW-190, which caused mixed feelings among the pilots. In 1947, the unit was transferred to Morocco, renamed Fighter Group 2 Touareg, and rearmed with used Mosquitoes from the Royal Air Force's stash. The Yak-3s were retired, thus saving the parties concerned from the curious situation in the future, when Soviet aircraft would have been used to fight against the national liberation movements of the peoples of Asia. In the period under consideration, the French military aviation consisted mainly of squadrons divided into groups with Roman numbering, although many authors have a tendency to neglect this and write in Arabic numerals and names in honor of different regions of the country. Thus, GC-26 is the second fighter group of the 6th Fighter Squadron, Normandy Niemen, or informally Noy-Nu, with the 6th Squadron having been disbanded after Normandy departed for the war. It seems logical to equate this structure with air regiments and squadrons, but there may be confusion since each group included 2 smaller units, called just squadrons. There were 20 airplanes in the fighter group. Mosquito were not happy, periodically beaten, and when in 1949 came the time to send to a distant war, it was clear that they will get rid of them. French, British Feiner had time to serve in Indochina, and in local climatic conditions showed themselves so badly that their combat career there was limited to a few months. The 2-6 pilots began to be retrained for the P-47 Thunderbolt. Here it is appropriate to recall the popular story of how the Americans put France on the Allied footstool by opposing the sending of P-47s to war. Until 1950, the U.S. was cool to Paris's colonial ambitions and motivated its ban by the fact that American weapons should protect the security of Europe. It wasn't just a matter of politics, however. The French themselves did not have an unambiguous view of the Thunderbolts, and in 1945 refused to use them in the Far East, and the reason lay on the surface. The takeoff and landing characteristics of these monsters allowed them to operate from only one airfield in the region, Tanchonyat. Even when the Americans changed their position and became the main financiers of the war, the Thunderbolts never appeared in Vietnam. Given the situation with the P-47, the French command opted for the Bell P-63C-5 King Cobra, a favor these aircraft were mainly in North Africa and had nothing to do with European security. In September, the pilots were trained on the P-63s in Tunisia. On October 6th, a very ceremonial loading on the Champollion liner took place in Bizerte, attended by the governor of Tunisia. An eyewitness compared the ceremony to a Bastille Day parade. After a 3-week journey on October 29, 1949, the Normandy Niemen Fighter Group under the command of Captain André Bijouen arrived in Indochina, taking over from the 3rd Fighter Squadron. The main place of its basing for the next year and a half was Saigon Airfield Tan Son Yat. Bijouen commanded until December and was succeeded by Captain Jacques Guillemin de Montplanet, who remained in command until the end of his tour of duty. Meanwhile, the Indochina War was already claiming the lives of former Normans. Captain Marc Chara, who had served with the squadron since February 1944, soup personal air victories and 5 as a group, did not return from a sortie in the area of Tholoi on July 30, 1949. It is believed that his Spitfire was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. It is difficult to locate the location of the captain's death on the map, nor to determine in which unit he was flying. The 3rd Fighter Squadron, at the time represented by Navarre and Champagne groups, is vaguely indicated. Chara was born in Saigon, so you could say he was fighting for his homeland. And in December of that year, Louis Astier died in a Saigon hospital, injured in the crash of a Beechcraft 18 civilian airline plane, not from illness as claimed. Astier had been with Normandy for a very short time, from which he was discharged after an incident involving a flight into enemy territory and the death of a passenger in August 1943. French Air Force fighter units were not permanently based in Indochina for most of the war, rotating usually after a year of service. The first P-63s appeared in the theater in the summer of 1949 as part of the Ile-de-France and Vendée fighter groups, so that Normandy-Niemen was the third formation with these aircraft. The P-63 as a fighter bomber replaced the morally and physically obsolete Mk-9 Spitfires. Inferior in range, the King Cobra performed well in everything else and was respected by the pilots, who nicknamed it the King. Since the Viet Minh had no air force of its own, the P-63's only missions were attack and reconnaissance. They sank sampans and junks used extensively for transportation of rice and ammunition, provided direct support to infantry, and attacked Viet Minh units that were detected. An unusual target was a radio station destroyed at Cape Camau on April 12, 1950. The weapons used were mostly embedded weapons, a 37mm cannon and four 12.7mm machine guns, and American fragmentation bombs. In theory, the King Cobra could carry 3 500-pound bombs, but judging from photographs, in the standard configuration, a transfer fuel tank was mounted under the fuselage in place of the third bomb. The use of unguided rockets was apparently limited due to their poor accuracy. Veteran 2-6 Roger Perotti. When they launched a rocket to the right, it flew to the left. Veteran 2-5 Jacques Rouchon. The 100mm rockets flew almost anywhere, which is why they were replaced by 70mm rockets. The type of the 100mm rockets mentioned is not identified. It is difficult to say whether napalm was used with the King Cobra. There are such claims, but they are unverifiable, and in general, it is believed that the French began using napalm in Vietnam only in the winter of 1951, when the Normandy-Niemen had already moved to the F-6F. At the Battle of Vignes, the Viet Minh were shocked by napalm bombardment, clearly having no previous familiarity with the weapon. Studies of the French colonial war tend to focus on the fighting in Tonkin, a little on Annam, Street Without Joy, Mobile Group 100, and virtually ignore Cochinchina. Indeed, the fate of French Indochina was decided primarily in the north. Vo Nguyen Giap, Colonial Road No. 4, the Line de Latra, Dien Bien Phu. And in the south, there was petty fussing around roadblocks. The Expeditionary Corps had to fight two different wars, and the Kohina War was always the poor relation of the Tonkin War, which was not shy of pulling troops, resources, and attention of historians. It would seem to make no difference that in 1950, the French won a strategic victory in the south. After all, they ultimately lost and withdrew. But the long-term consequences of this forgotten victory cannot be ignored. If France had given up the South along with the North to the Viet Minh at the Geneva talks, South Vietnam would not have emerged, and the red flag over Saigon would not have flown in 1975, but in 1954. This did not happen partly because of the position of the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, and partly because the outcome of the confrontation in the South was clearly not in favor of the Viet Minh. Strictly speaking, in the North, even after Dien Bien Phu was far from a military victory, but that is another story. And here, the Normandy-Niemen fighter group played its role. When the wheels of the first King Cobras touched the runway of Tang Son Nhut, in the fate of Cochinchina came a turning point. Lieutenant General Nguyen Binh, commander of the Viet Minh forces in Nam Bo, the Vietnamese name for Cochinchina, decided to move to the third stage of the Revolutionary War, according to Mao Zedong's concept, the general offensive. It is noteworthy that in this he was ahead of Vo Nguyen Giap, who started the third stage in the north almost a year later. The decision was a bold one. While the northern comrades had the newly victorious People's Republic of China at their side with its arms supplies and military advisors, the southerners had nothing. Not even the Ho Chi Minh Trail existed yet. With great difficulty, Binh created 4 regiments of the main force, not too much by the standards of the Red River Delta, but solid for the Mekong Delta, because the French grouping here was quite different from that in the north. In preparation for the offensive, Binh stepped up propaganda and urban guerrilla in Saigon, and his efforts fell on fertile ground. The new Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Phan Long was keen to distance himself from France, and in an anti-colonial frenzy, decided to disarm the Saigon police. In the first half of 1950, the streets of eastern Paris were constantly filled with grenades, enemies of the revolution being killed, and students marching with Viet Minh banners, who were already preparing to storm the city. The role of the 2-6 group in the fighting of this period is invaluable. By the beginning of 1950, there were only 4 fighter groups of the French Air Force in Indochina: 2-3, 1-5, 2-5, 2-6. There were no bomber groups yet. Normandy Niemen was the only fighter unit in the Tactical Air Group South, Gatak Sud. In simpler words, the entire Air Force combat aviation in Cochinchina had 24 King Cobras, not counting the improvised bombers AAC, copies of German Ju-52 transports. And this small detachment was at times yanked back and forth to Cambodia and Tonkin. Nguyen Binh struck the first blow of his general offensive near Chavin in December 1949. Things were going well. The Viet Minh captured and burned several roadblocks defended by Khmer militia, and then ambushed a Moroccan battalion and inflicted tangible losses on it. Emboldened by his success, Binh regrouped his troops and sent them on another attack in mid-January 1950. But the French already knew that they were facing a large force and reacted more quickly. At the end of the 2-week operation, the offensive was dispersed without achieving much results. Normandy aircraft were involved in these battles, although details are scarce. For example, it is emphasized that air support helped the French quickly dislodge the Viet Minh from the village of Bao Cat, near which there was an important bridge. During January, Group 2 or 6 flew 250 combat sorties. After a respite and replenishment, 5 battalions of the Viet Minh struck again in late March at Chavin, and on April 4th, the offensive at Shoc Chong was launched. Originally, these operations were to begin simultaneously, and the delay was certainly one of the reasons for the defeat. Supporting and diversionary strikes were launched in a number of other areas. Employing their favorite tactic of attack and ambush reinforcements, the Viet Minh still failed to stop the French mobile formations and to achieve anything more substantial than the destruction of a few roadblocks. By April 6th, French commanders claimed that at least 400 enemy soldiers had been killed at Chavin. At Shoc Chang, the planes inflicted definitely very significant losses on the attackers, and near Can Tho, they sank 100 boats in a raid on a river convoy. It is clear that these cases involve Normandy P-63s because of the lack of other combat aircraft in the region. Fighting in the Mekong Delta lasted several weeks and quieted down before the rainy season in May. The Viet Minh in the south were inferior to their northern comrades in numbers and armament, so the French pilots here had fewer problems from anti-aircraft fire. King Cobras often returned to base with bullet holes in late March when the fighting at Chavin began, almost daily, but combat losses were rare. On May 5, 1950, during a sortie to Chavigny, fire from the ground damaged the cooling system on number 44-4173. Adjutant Leon Perrier made a belly landing near Kai Lai. The mechanics removed everything of value from the machine and left it to rust. Under similar circumstances, on September 14th, Captain de Roger Dupré landed near Tay Ninh, only his aircraft, number 44-4149. The same plane that had its wing replaced in November 49 was evacuated for repairs. On October 22nd, King Cobra of Sergeant Chef Turpin landed on the Kamishovaya plain. Obviously also with battle damage, the number and fate of the plane in this case is unknown. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Don't forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. See you soon.